This will air tomorrow night. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to the Common Denominator. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. Today, I'm exceptionally excited to sit with a woman who I've looked forward to speaking with, Dalia Ziada. No, I'm going to say that again. It's Ziada, right?
Yeah, right.
Sorry, I'll do it again. Welcome back to the Common Denominator. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. Today, I'm exceptionally excited to sit with a woman who I've looked forward to speaking with. Dalia Ziada is an award-winning Egyptian writer and senior fellow for research and diplomacy at the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs. Previously, Dalia worked in leading positions at major regional and international think tanks and civil society organizations, where she analyzed the geopolitics of the Eastern... I gotta fix that. I'm gonna turn these off.
No, it's okay.
No, I'm gonna turn this off. Yeah, this is what it means when you move house into a house that has no kitchen. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There we go. Previously, Dalia worked in leading positions at major regional and international think tanks and civil society organizations, where she analyzed the geopolitics of the Eastern Mediterranean region, advocated for peace and democracy in the Middle East, and fought tough political and cultural battles against radical Islamist groups in Arab countries. Dalia studied international security at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and at Tufts University in the US. She's the author of the best-selling book, The Curious Case of the Three-Legged Wolf in Egypt, Military Islamism and Liberal Democracy, and other internationally acclaimed books on the political complications of the Middle East region. Dalia has accomplished all the above, and in addition, I'd like to add that from the outset, that Dalia has displayed significant bravery, certainly throughout the past month since October 7th, but long before that, as we'll hear soon as well. We live in a time where willingness to go against the stream has never been a more dangerous endeavor, nor a more vitally needed one. Having heard Dalia speak, I recognize the battle she engages. It's an unwavering commitment to objective truths for their own sake. That's something that speaks to my own heart and mission, and it's always with renewed faith to meet another with such integrity. Dalia, welcome to the Common Denominator.
Thank you so much, Ilana. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I've been following your work for a while, and you're doing great work on behalf of our common mission for peace.
Absolutely, I appreciate that, and again, I really can't reiterate enough that as I said to you off camera, there aren't that many people willing to speak up, and those that do certainly come to the table for a myriad of reasons. But what I hear from you, Dalia, again and again, is there's a adherence to a mission. You said it yourself, a duty, and it calls you to it's an objective truth that I say often that none of us hold, none of us own, but is accessible to all of us. And I see that it's that truth, that one that we can all put our hand on in the middle, is what you represent. And I am really glad to meet you in person finally.
That's right. Actually, they say there is always an opportunity in every crisis. And I believe in the crisis of October 7, as horrific as it was, and as horrific as was the response in either on the regional level or the international level to the attacks, and how people took so long to condemn a terrorist act that was clearly an action of terrorism. It's not negotiable. It's not a maybe. It's an act of terrorism, but it took the international community too long to condemn it, and we saw the celebrations happening in the region. I think that's mainly why we all, and by we I mean the people who believe in peace, who believe in a better future for our region, the Middle East, felt compelled somehow to speak up, to stand up for the Jewish people, to stand up for the victims of October 7, to stand up for the peace process that is now dying on the hands of a horrible terrorist organization like Hamas and its other fellow terrorist organizations. So your initiative and other initiative, I think this is the fruit of this crisis. and it's a good fruit, and it's gonna be successful, I'm sure.
I think that we don't have any other choice. And what I think is interesting, I think that certainly, as a Jew and as an Israeli, I have the existential crisis. There's only one. I only have one choice to speak up. But I think that the things that draw people like you and other people that I've been honored to have on as guests and other people we see speaking across the world, it's not just specifically rooting for any or even defending any particular people as much as we may or may not need it. I think it's alarming. It is absolutely alarmed, red blinking like all of us, to see something as objective as October 7th, where there's no hearsay involved. It was GoPro'd, live streamed by the perpetrators themselves, every minute of it. And to watch that turn within a matter of hours and days, to be denied, to see that real time denial of objective, evident, verifiable reality, I think has completely alarmed and should rightly so, all of us. Because if we don't have a shared reality, then how can we have civilization? If we cannot agree on what's a man and what's a woman, and what's right and what's wrong, and what's vulnerable parts of ourselves, there's a reason that the vulnerable are protected, our children and our elderly, because we are a human species who wants to continue, and civilization, law and order has shown us that seems to be the best way for this human species forward. And to see a direct attack on that should have everyone out there rooting and calling. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So let's start back with Dalia growing up. Let's just start at the beginning to learn something about you, Dalia, and the world that you grew up in. What was the Egypt in which you lived? What's been the trajectory of your witness, the Egyptian and Arab world throughout that time, and how have you changed? Give us a starting point.
So yeah, this is very interesting question, because actually I grew up at a time when there was supposed to be peace between Egypt and Israel, and there was supposed to be cooperation, and it was actually, I was born in 1982. This means like 2 or 3 years before I was born, the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel was signed, and there should have been a momentum at that time for this peace treaty, similar, for example, to what we've seen after the signing of the Abraham Accords recently between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, and also other Arab countries and Israel. But it was not the case. It seemed at that time that actually this peace treaty, yes, it was an important strategic agreement between Egypt and Israel on how to manage their security issues, but it was not really a peace treaty in the term meaning that it didn't lead to actual peace on the ground. I grew up listening to sheikhs and imams in the mosques cursing the Israel and the Jewish people every Friday in the Friday sermons. It was like there is a staple prayer in every Friday, like about cursing the Jews and those who are cooperating with the Jews. It's I think it also was inherited from the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was Gamal Abdel Nasser, he was the first president of the Egyptian Republic, and he's notorious for persecuting the Egyptian Jews and pushing the Egyptian Jews out of the country when the war started with Israel and after the foundation of Israel in 1948. And so it's a very complicated history. But he is one of the criminals, in my opinion, who participated in this level of hatred we're seeing today. Actually, at his time, level of hatred and lack of peace that we're suffering in our region up till today. During his era, during his rule, he used to dictate to the mosques what to say on Friday sermons. It was a rule, it was a law that mosques and the sheikhs in the mosques cannot speak up about any other topic before reviewing it with the government first. So they used to dictate to them what to say, so they control the public narrative. And of course, one stable prayer that remained from the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser to our time, until this moment I'm speaking with you, is this stable prayer in every Friday sermon to curse, for God to curse the Jews and those who are cooperating with them. So I grew up hearing this. I grew up learning in my school books, in my primary school books, that there was something called the October War. And the October War, they refer to the Yom Kippur War between Egypt and Israel. And of course, they put it in the text in a celebratory way. They are celebrating it as a victory over this entity and hostile entity that's called Israel. And even they call it our historical enemy. So imagine how many people like me, how many people in my generation and the generations after grew up learning this. And guess what? After you study this course in your primary school, the school takes the students to a museum in Cairo, where you see it's a museum of the October War, of the Yom Kippur War with Israel, where you see how Israel is really our enemy. But guess what? It never happened all my life. It never happened that even 1 year they celebrated the anniversary of signing the peace treaty with Israel. They only celebrated the anniversary of signing of the war, the anniversary of the October War with Israel, but never, nothing about celebrating the anniversary of signing the peace treaty. So growing up in this environment makes it very easy to radicalize young people. And the mainstream, the general public we are seeing right now in Egypt sympathizing with Hamas are actually victims to this narrative, are victims to the narratives the government has been feeding them for decades. That Israel, our hostile enemy, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, is actually a resistance group that's doing something noble that we have to support. And it was very, very shocking. For me, the change happened 2 times, actually. I was lucky that I was faced by incidents that made me think out of the books, out of this radical, stupid books that I'm sorry to say that everyone is in the Arab world, not only in Egypt, is somehow locked up in. So the first incident happened when I was a young student, like a junior student in my undergraduate university. This was around the time of the second Intifada. And you can imagine, of course, Al Jazeera was very new at that time, and they were showering us with photos and footage and videos from Gaza. And of course, like very twisted narrative about what's going on, and making it appear as if, like, Israel is so brutal, they are killing people randomly. All the narratives that's now being said to the people, also through Al Jazeera, to the young people in universities right now. So of course I was affected by all of that, and I started, like, I have to participate in the protests that are happening in my university. And it didn't take me too long, only about 2 months or so, to discover that the Muslim Brotherhood were behind these protests. And after a little bit of thinking and research, I discovered how this network is connected. Qatar's Al Jazeera is connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, and all of them are working in synchronity to promote one narrative that is very far from the truth. And actually, we were a little lucky at that time, because some of us, of course, not everyone, had some limited access to the internet, and we were able to, like as young people, to discover for ourselves what the other side of the news is saying. So somehow this helped me see the truth. So of course I withdrew immediately after I knew that the Muslim Brotherhood was involved. But something really interesting happened in the summer of the same year, of the same school year. I met an amazing woman who's Egyptian Jew, And it was part of, I was actually a volunteer in interfaith dialogue activities. And in my mind, it was only between Muslims and Christians. I didn't even know at that I was like 18 years old or so, and I didn't know that we had Egyptian Jews. Can you believe that? It was crazy. And this is again because of what is being told to us in the media, what is being told to us in our schools and our mosques. And here, when I met her, it was life changing for me. I really felt uh, how I really saw with my own eyes how the Jewish people suffered when they were forced to leave Egypt, and they are leaving it just because of their religion. They are leaving their homeland, and they have to choose between their religion or their homeland. It was very unacceptable to me. And at that moment, I believe it was the first moment when I decided to be an advocate for Muslim Jewish dialogue first, and then an advocate for Arab Israeli peace after that. So this is how I changed. This is how I became, and I was lucky actually. As soon as I put my first foot on this track, it just took me to great destinations along my journey. And I'm so lucky that I got this opportunities to be exposed to the truth that opened my eyes. So yeah, so this is basically my story, and this is why I'm here now.
But this is incredible. And I really, I want you to explain to us, because people speak about, first of all, differentiate for us the Arab world versus the Muslim world. And then I want to talk about, everybody talks about, you're talking about, at least as far as Muslims, we're talking about different numbers, 1.8 billion. And people talk about, it's like a group of homogenous, everybody thinks the same, which is patently, it's not possible. But yet you are this fantastic anomaly, and that's so wonderful to meet you. But out of 1.8 billion people, where's the rest? How lonely are you? How open are your colleagues to hearing such ideas?
Yeah, actually, it's even when you look at all the Muslims or all the Arabs, they are not homogeneous. They are not the same. Like, not all the Arabs the same, not all the Muslims the same, and Muslims are not necessarily similar to Arabs. It's a very complicated topic, but let's dismantle it one by one. Let's start by looking at Arabs and Muslims. Of course, I think many people are confused because after October 7 attacks happened, it was celebrated not only in the Arab world, but it was celebrated in places as far as Pakistan and Malaysia and other places where there is a large Muslim population. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, is that the hatred toward the Jews, which some people call anti-Semitism, but I don't use the term anti-Semitism when referring to Arabs, because they always say, okay, but we are Semite too. Why you cannot say that we are anti-Semite? But there is a lot of hatred. Actually, they say so to cover the huge level of hatred that they are having towards Israel for ideological reasons. So there is the Arab dimension of the issue and the Islamic dimension of the issue. In the Islamic culture, it's deeply rooted. Like, the hatred toward the Jews, unfortunately, is deeply rooted. And it has to do with political reasons. It doesn't have to do with the religion itself. But what happened is that some of the tribes that existed in the Hijaz area at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, when he first came with the message of Islam, they resisted him because, for economic reasons, mainly because they were selling wine, they were producing and selling wine, and he made wine haram. He made it like prohibited. So some wars started between them, between these tribes. And like any politicians, Prophet Muhammad at that time also, he was a politician basically. So he twisted the narrative to encourage his people to fight against this tribe by saying that, okay, they are Jews and they are fighting us because we are Muslims. And then the Sahaba, who are like the companions of the Prophet, later on started to repeat that in different generations. And thus, people started to fight against the Jewish tribes at that time, and until today, some of the protesters that are some of the slogans that are chanted in the protests against Israel today in Muslim countries ranging from Iran to Arab countries and even like South Asia countries, and so they use a very interesting slogan that dates back to the time of the Prophet, to the time of the early days of Islam, which is Khaybar, Khaybar ya Yahud, Jaysh Muhammad Sawfa Yaud, which Khaybar is the name of the Jewish tribe that the Muslims fought against at that time, at that ancient time. So they are saying, the slogans are saying, oh, like what happened to Khaybar, the army of Prophet Muhammad is coming back to like annihilate the Jews, to kill the Jews. So can you imagine? Can you imagine how they are thinking? So unfortunately, it's deeply rooted from this side. And also it has to do with the general hatred towards, the Jewish religion, the fact that it is the first religion, the first Abrahamic religion. So every religion that comes after that is trying to prove that it is wrong, and we are right, and so on. And of course, it was very evident in Islam. The Arab dimension is another thing, and it's very interesting because there was not a problem between Arabs and Jews before, like a real problem, like a real ideological problem between the Arabs and Jews before the establishment, before the Egyptian revolution of 1952 and the establishment of I would say the new kingdom of Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was supposed to be a republic, but he was a dictator, as you know. And he needed to find, he was obsessed with the idea of pan-Arabism, of uniting all Arabs around one cause. And he came in power in 1954 or so, and the revolution in 1952. This was around the time when Israel was first founded. And of course, there was like some individualistic resistance towards Israel from places like Syria, the area of Jordan, and from the surrounding areas of Israel. So Abdel Nasser offered himself as a savior, and he came up with this pan-Arabism idea. He said, Israel, our enemy, and all Arabs are going to fight against this enemy. And through that, he served his own goal of finding a common enemy where he can gather all Arabs, to attract all Arabs to gather around him. And he was somehow successful in that, unfortunately, because the momentum allowed that, the political momentum allowed that. So he was successful, and Pan-Arabism succeeded at his time, and also it has to do with the influence of communism from Russia and so against, and also marketing Israel as a version of the West in the region, version of America in the region, and thus, or Britain, it's a version of the West, a Western version, a foreign body in the region, and thus they fought also against it from a communist point of view. That's why you would be surprised that until today, like leftists or socialists and Islamists disagree on many things, but they agree on one thing, which is hatred to Israel and hatred to the Jewish people. It's really, really interesting. So this is from the Arab dilemma, the Arab perspective. But in the recent years, we saw something really refreshing happened, which is Abraham Accords. Some of the Gulf countries that was actually founded after this war happened, after all these wars happened, after they were founded in the 1970s, So it was literally after everything has happened. And they came up and said, like, okay, why should we carry the burden of something that happened even before we were founded? We think Israel is a good neighbor, and we are willing to cooperate with it on several projects on economic. It was mainly economic. I would say the Abraham Accords are mainly economic, similar to, for example, the Jordan and Egypt treaties with Israel. They were mainly security agreements. The Abraham Accords were mainly economic agreements, but they were much warmer than the peace agreements that Jordan and Egypt signed in previous times. So we thought that, okay, finally the region is waking up and realizing that it's not really about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not about this conflict over this piece of land. There is an opportunity for peace on the wider scale of the region, an Arab-Israeli peace. But actually, Iran did not like that. Iran wanted to disturb this momentum because it's not serving Iran in any way. Iran is feeding on the division between Israel and Arab countries. And of course, it didn't want to see Saudi Arabia, for example, normalizing relations with Israel. It could have been like a case of death to Iran, actually. So it had to intervene. So it empowered Hamas in a certain way. And of course, it was behind the October 7 attacks. And at the same time, it mobilized other militias like the Houthis and Hezbollah to aid Hamas in this mission and to distract Israel from the Israeli army, the IDF, from fighting against Hamas. And we saw all the chaos and mess that we have seen in the past few months. Of course, its first target is Israel, but its main target is to cause this division between Arabs and Israel and kill any opportunity for regional peace, actual peace in the region.
There's so much to unpack in what you said. Maybe I'll just go back in order. I want to understand a bit better. So here's the thing. Khaybar, Khaybar, that chant clearly happened before 1948, right? So this whole idea that it's about this little itty bitty piece of land is in the chant sort of, collapses. If you're saying it's not, explain to me there can be such a pervasive, ubiquitous hatred of Jews. If it's not religious, how does the ideological, explain to me the nuance there?
Yeah, so it's, Islam is not purely a religion of, what I say, like religious practices. It has also to do with the concept of the state and politics. So politics and religion are very mixed inside Islam. So you cannot differentiate them. So actually, that's why, if you look at the history of Islam, it's all based on, making invasions, like invading a certain country and promoting Islam there. And they say it in a celebratory way also. It's like a form of celebration. And so this is how Islam is like. It's, of course, so you cannot differentiate between the religious ideology and the political ideology in the minds of Muslims, even general public Muslims. And not only, on the leadership, religious leadership or political leadership. That's why when they say Khaybar ya Yahud, they look at it as it's our duty as Muslims and our duty as Arabs to fight against Israel. But when you say as a Muslim, you cannot say to fight against Israel as a country. You have also to give it like a religious equivalence. You say you fight against the Jews. And unfortunately, some of the hadiths are the texts narrated by the Prophet Muhammad, and it was adopted later on by his companions and followers, and are considered like words of wisdom that should be used and followed by Muslims as well. One of these hadiths is actually used by Hamas to justify what they are doing, to justify why they were established. And this hadith says that the Messiah will not appear until Muslims kill all Jews. And actually, the Jewish people will be hiding behind some kind of trees that's now planted in Israel. And this tree will speak up and will call on the Muslim fighter to come. There is a Jewish hiding behind me. Come kill him or kill her. So, okay, I feel ashamed when I read these things, because I'm a Muslim and it should not be this way. Religion is made for us to love each other, to understand each other, to understand that we all belong to the same human family. We all belong to the same God. We worship the same God. We all belong to the same source, actually. But unfortunately, some people decided to politicize religion the same way Islam was politicized. And also, when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself, like this, the conflict over the piece of land, this small conflict, it didn't start as a religious conflict. It started just as a political conflict over a piece of land. I would say also as an economic conflict over a piece of land, where every side wanted to have like a bigger piece of the land or something like that. But later on, it's and by the way, it's not different from many other conflicts that are happening all over the region. If you look around you all over the Middle East region, there are many similar conflicts over pieces of lands. Even in Cyprus, in the Mediterranean, the island is divided into two simply because people are fighting over this piece of land as well. So it's not different from other conflicts. But what made it complicated later on is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was Islamized, meaning that it took an Islamic flavor in the 1980s, and especially after the Iranian Revolution in the 1978-79, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict started to take an Islamized flavor. It's not anymore the leftist communist parties fighting for liberating the land in the form of PLO and others, the Palestinian Liberation Organization and others. No, it's now Hamas. It's now the Islamic Jihad. It's now jihadist Islamist organizations that are coming from a religious ideology that are fighting this war, and they are somehow trying to copy the triumph that their fellow Muslims in Iran has done. This revolution that happened in Iran inspired them somehow to do similar acts to liberate their own land also, as they say. It's not what I say, this is what they say. So we saw the birth of Hamas around this time. And also this was the time where the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Jordan, and other countries around Israel gained a momentum, a very big momentum, as they are not anymore marginalized religious groups that no one wants to speak with. But no, after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they started to gain momentum, and actually governments started to appease them to avoid a similar scenario to what happened in Iran. So unfortunately, we ended up in this situation. Islamizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict led to this disaster we're seeing today.
I think it's an absolutely crucial point, because this war is presented to the public as if it's a Israel-Palestinian war, which is not actually the case whatsoever. This is actually, if to be perfectly on point, it's the West versus Iran, but we could at least say it's Israel versus Iran. And as you already noted, you also put into a bit of order for us the reason why Israel must come first. Israel is sort of the bottle top, like the battling, destroying Israel has to be the first step, because it's this foreign American Western entity in the middle of the Middle East. Is that my understanding correctly? Like, because you hear even yesterday, the Islamic regime's president in Iran was sworn in, and they were all chanting "Death to America." That's what they were chanting at his inauguration. You know, I mean, this is not Israel's war. This is just us going first. And it's really important that people, of course, with all the distortion and manipulation in the media, but I think it's important that we make very clear Israel and Iran. And I also think that, you know, with all the very real human suffering that has come out, let's say, just in this region, just over the past 76 years, it's so, you touched on a point that I haven't heard anybody else say, but I want to say first, it's so intentional, meaning the suffering is so deliberate. It's, to me, from this point of view, seems to me it's one of the most lucrative brands that can possibly, well, a point that you made, Dalia, that I hadn't heard anybody say before was, it's not just, oh, of course they hate the Jews, and oh, of course, it's the politicalization of it, it's the leadership taking that hatred and utilizing it and inflaming it for their own political motivations. That's a point that I really haven't heard people make, and it's very important because we kind of think, certainly Jews think, well, okay, so Muslims hate Jews, but there's a real, there's a real manipulation going on there. If you wanted to say anything else, I had.
Yeah.
So
So let me comment on them separately. So the first point about Iran. Okay, let's keep Iran for now. But the second point, because this is the most interesting for me, is that it's actually the politicizing of this Muslim-Jewish conflict, if I can say, is not only benefiting, it did not only benefit the tribes at the time of Prophet Muhammad, that ancient time, but it's now also benefiting the politicians, the modern day politicians. For decades in the Arab world, it has become the norm that whenever there is a domestic problem happening, they bring in the media the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So they distract the people from their own domestic problems and they take them out there. But actually, this was broken when the Arab Spring happened. This pattern of distracting the people was broken when the Arab Spring happened. Because the people who were told all the time, like, Israel is our historical enemy. If you make a revolution, if Egypt becomes weak, for example, Israel will be invading us. It will immediately take advantage of the situation and they will take Sinai once again. But when the Arab Spring happened, Israel actually did not invade us. Guess who invaded us? It's Hamas. Hamas infiltrated into Sinai, built terrorist organizations, and empowered existing terrorist organizations inside Sinai, and actually provided them with money and munition and made them launch operations against Egyptians in Sinai and against the Egyptian military in Sinai because they wanted to control the area. And who helped us get rid of Hamas later on? It's Israel. It's Israel. Israel helped us liberate Sinai from Hamas in 2014 and 2015. And these are not my words. These are the words of the current president of the Egyptian state, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, when he was the Minister of Defense at that time. He has statements where he said that he approached his counterparts in Israel to ask them to get closer to the border of Israel. And they did not only say, okay, get closer to the border so you can fight Hamas, but actually they also said, we are going to help you. And the IDF got involved, cooperated with the Egyptian military to fight against Hamas in Sinai. This was epic. And this was very eye-opening to many people at that time. So this is the point about how politicians are abusing and utilizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And unfortunately, right now, it's all coming back. Although I was just saying that the Arab Spring broke this momentum. But once again, after October 7, and the Arab governments are somehow using the same playbook once again right now. Speaking about Iran, because it's Ilana, it was so shocking. Like in the past few days, like about 2 weeks ago or so, the Israeli Prime Minister was here in Washington, and he was speaking at the Congress. And of course, there were protesters all over the place because he was here. But the protesters went to a point that is really, really shocking. And it was shocking not only to the American people, but even to people like me who are watching from abroad, which is the thing of burning the American flag.
Yes.
Taking down the American flag at the Union Station and raising the Palestinian flag, and then putting and insulting the American flag, putting it on the ground, like crashing it with their feet and then burning it.
Wow.
The only place we saw a similar scene, exactly a similar scene, was in Yemen by the Houthis. There is a famous video where the Yemenis are just, insulting the American flag and also burning it on the ground and cursing America and vowing death to America. The same scene also we saw in Iran. So it was shocking that actually Iran influence has extended to the US. They have their hands here, and they can. And these useful idiots, they are really useful idiots who are doing this. If not perpetrators, I believe they are not even useful. They are jihadists. They believe in these jihadist ideas. Otherwise, why would they burn the American flag like this? Why would they insult the American flag like this and raise the Palestinian flag in its place? It's so unacceptable, so unacceptable. And by the way, many of them are Arabs. I saw in the videos, and none of them can do a similar thing in their original countries. None of them. I tell you, it happened once in Egypt that some members of the Muslim Brotherhood tried, around the time of the Arab Spring also, tried to burn the Egyptian flag. These people were arrested and they are in jail up till now, and they are accused of committing high treason.
Wow,
So
there you go.
it's not a form of free expression as they are claiming. No, it's an act of jihad. Because I tell you why, because it has very much to do with the ideology of Islamists in general. Islamists do not believe in the nation state, in the concept of nation state. They don't believe in the flag. The Salafists in Egypt, when the Muslim Brotherhood took power and they wanted to, and they became unfortunately members of parliament at that time, it was a big mess. Like, imagine the Muslim Brotherhood in presidency and the Salafists in parliament. Like, all of a sudden became Afghanistan, So at that time, they refused to stand when the national anthem was played and the Egyptian flag was raised. Can you believe this? And they said, because it's not, and when they were criticized later on in the media, they said, because this is not Islamic. And they were very honest. It's not Islamic. It's not Islamic. These Islamists do not respect the concept of the nation states. Do not respect nation states. They only respect their Islamic caliphate system, the Ummah system. So unfortunately, we saw this happening, and it shows you how influential Iran has become. Listen to all the statements of the Iranian leaders, and also to the statements by the leaders of this Iran-sponsored militia like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the militia in Syria and Iraq. All of them refer to the US, America, as the great Satan, and to Israel as the small Satan. So as a metaphor, I always like to say it this way, that in the perception of Iran and its followers, and also the other terrorist organizations in the region, on the Sunni side, they look at Israel as the weak link, or let's say it's the weak joint of the West, of this giant that's called the West, with all that it represents: democracy, liberalism, human rights, women's rights, of course, which they despise. These Islamists despise these values. So to target this giant West that is very powerful and very well grounded, let's hit its weak link. And its weak link or weak joint is Israel. It's right here in the region. We can easily mobilize the people against it by raising religious sentiments or a certain political narratives that serves our purpose, and then we can actually we can weaken this West. The sad thing right now is that, yes, the West has always, and the America in particular, has always realized that this is the case. But unfortunately, in the past few years, let's say 2 or 3 years, this has not been the case anymore. It's the US is looking at the Middle East and at the conflict that's happening right now between Israel and some of the terrorist organizations in the region as if it is a Middle Eastern issue. It's not our problem. We should not care about. We can make maybe make some comments from abroad, from distance, but it's not really our problem. And I think this is very similar to the mistake that was made before 9/11 attacks, when they looked at Afghanistan as a problem or the terrorism of Al-Qaeda as a problem of the Middle East region, as a problem of a region that's far from us. And eventually it hit the US. So my fear right now is that this insistence of ignoring what's happening in the Middle East, of declining to help Israel in its war against against Iran-sponsored terrorism in the Middle East, my fear is that this is going to lead to something bigger in Western capitals, including in the United States. I hope not, but I can see it is coming because of these flawed policies adopted by the US right now. And actually, if you think about it, if the US get involved in helping Israel in this war, other Arab countries also will get involved. Arab countries will not get involved in the. Actually, I know personally, I know from my talks with some politicians on the ground in some Arab countries that they are eager to join Israel in its war against Iran, because Iran is a threat to Arabs too. Hamas is a threat to Arabs too. So they are eager to join Israel, but because of the public opinion, because of the pressure of the public opinion, they just cannot go there upon the invitation of Israel. But if the United States is involved and the United States is the leader that makes this invitation, let's unite the Arab allies and Israel. Let's unite together to fight against this common enemy, Iran and its militia. It will be a different story. We will be living a whole different story right now. But this is not the case.
And what do you think? There's a million things I could say, but on this last point, what do you think is going on with America? Because I've had this discussion with other people. We know we're not talking about stupid people. We know they understand what the concept of deterrence, and clearly it's lacking. Why don't we see America stepping up? Do you think that they will turn around? We have to wait until the next election. What do you see?
It's politics. It's mainly politics. I think it has mainly to do with domestic politics in the United States. They can see that, the momentum in universities was very big, actually. The momentum of support to the so-called Palestinian cause that we've been seeing in the aftermath of October 7 and the start of the war. It was very big and very loud. And I think Islamist organizations here in the US have been preparing for this moment for decades. And I mean literally decades. If you go back to the texts to the writings of in the 1990s, I believe the FBI discovered some of the writings of the plans of the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States. And in one of the documents they discovered, and it's available online, anyone can look it up, the Muslim Brotherhood was making a plan to sabotage America from within, so they can destroy the head of the liberal world and establish their own caliphate. So how to sabotage America from within? How was their plan going? First, to create a second generation that goes to universities, that occupy important positions in the American government, and thus at a certain moment, when the time is right, when the momentum is right, they mobilize all these people and they make a movement that discredits America and make even Americans people hate America and thus sabotage America from within. This is, I think, we are living this right now. It's happening right now. The Islamists have been preparing for it. The Muslim Brotherhood in particular have been preparing for it for decades, and now they are harvesting the fruit, sadly. Yes. And it is what we're seeing what happened in university campuses after October 7 and the beginning of the war in Gaza is actually the fruit of, or the result of, ignoring the BDS campaigns that happened in universities for decades, for about 15 years now, and no one really took an action against it. The BDS campaigns against Israel that was led by Islamist students and Islamist organizations inside university campuses. They ignored the funding that's coming from wrong actors like Qatar and others to universities and academic institutions in the US. There were no monitoring on this. They ignored also how Islamists were able to manipulate the free space, the space for freedom of speech in the open society of America to, unfortunately, to project their own ideology and represent it as if it is Islam, as if it is the ideology of Islam, and make anyone, and use the weapon of Islamophobia against anyone who dares to speak against their extremist ideology. So all of this was ignored, and thus now they have the momentum and the power to do what they are doing right now. So it's all related. If you think about it, it's all connected to each other. It's all connected. But again, as I said, maybe this is the opportunity in the crisis. Maybe it is a time now that people see for themselves that the real risk is coming from this direction, and we have to fight against it.
I think that you can't. I'm so glad that you brought up the image. It's so true. The image of seeing the American flag, and was born in America. I have the audacity to believe in self-determination because of my being raised in America, and to see it burning, it's a very interesting phenomenon, because you understand that everything that you cherish is under attack with that. There's nothing, all of us recognize that. Never mind to take the further step to raise another flag in its place. And there's no question, I agree with every word that you said, that this is the devouring from within, which is to make us hate. I mean, I think I've said it many times before, I think that we were sold a brochure of America, also of Israel in certain ways, in a different light, as a finished package. Everything bad happened long ago in the past, and now it's all shiny future, as opposed to looking at us as a work in progress, as look at how far we've come, look at us in comparison. You don't see China or North Korea beating their chest over all the woes and all the terrible things they've done. But to look at this, like, let's get together and keep making it bigger and better, and pruning and working with what's viable. And I think that what that's brought us to is understanding that we are at a breaking point. And you know how people are, every life is coming at you. It has never been a more accelerated pace. The social media and the life online has made things chaotic to a degree that I think that the human on an elemental 1.0 level is really confronted with at this point. And I think that there's very little gray. While we all live in the complexities of our perspectives and our experiences from birth until now, I think that things are very, very black and white. We understand, this is a breaking point. This is what people have been calling out for 20 years before and 15 years before, and at least, and now we see it coming to a head. This is it. You want civilization, you want law and order, you want it improved, great. Let's get to it. And I really think that we're there. And like you, Dalia, it gives me a certain amount of hope. It's terrifying. It's really, when you really grasp, this is real life. It's wonderful to take a moment and to be able to have meet kindred minds in all of this. But it's this is real. This is not, you grow up in America and you're on that island over there, so to speak, and everything happens somewhere else, and it's not somewhere else. It's in our streets. It's Union Square burning the flag. It's children in university. It's you paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars to send your kids to despise.
Ilana, I'm not an American, but I felt as if someone has stabbed me in the chest when I saw this happening, really, because it's the American flag for me represents all the values that I've been fighting all my life for, like human rights, women's rights, freedom, liberalism, and now it's insulted inside America. So it's shocking.
Yeah, it is shocking, and I think that to a certain degree, as much as we push things off, well, now we're it's very clearly it's not forward, it's right or left, and I don't mean politically right or left. But since you already brought up women's rights, just to go way back, because I was going to start off with this, but we launched off. You got involved in activism, actually the exact same way that I did with the issue of female genital mutilation, and so you. And I guess just in brief, we're already aware of going against the grain. But Dalia, you're not speaking to us from your homeland in Egypt.
Yeah.
You are not there. Tell us why.
Yeah, it's a sad story. When October 7 happened, actually, I was following the news from an Egyptian media outlet. So I thought they were lying at the beginning. They said like it's just a clash between Israeli soldiers and Hamas militants. And you live in the region, and this is like a staple piece of news. We hear it every now and then, so nothing is new.
Right.
So I thought, okay, it's just another piece of news, maybe a bigger clash than usual, but at the end of the day, it's a clash between soldiers and Hamas militants. A few days later, I was invited to by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel to a video conference where they brought large number of Arab journalists and activists to show them what happened on October 7, to show them the reality of what happened on the ground on October 7. And I cannot describe to you how I felt after seeing these horrific scenes of burning houses, killing children, killing people who are partying, who are civilians, like doing nothing. They were just partying. Just people in their pajamas were killed, and raping women, and all these horrific scenes. And at that time, I felt, after watching this, I felt so angry. Not only because of what I saw, but also because of the lies about it in our media. You were right a few minutes ago. You were speaking about the power of online rhetoric, the online narrative. It's crazy how the media, either social media or traditional media outlets, lied about it just to make it appear like Hamas are so nice, are so cute. They didn't touch any civilians. They only killed the soldiers. But actually, you discovered that they were so heinous that they went on and killed civilians with cold blood. They brutalized them. They raped women. They did horrible things. And then they ran away like rats and hid in the tunnels, and let the other civilians on the other side, the Palestinians, civilians who did not choose this war, to pay for the price of the war that they started.
That's right.
It's so unacceptable. And guess what? Like, the international community is not blaming Hamas for this, not blaming Hamas for what happened on October, or maybe condemning Hamas, not really taking an action against such a terrorist organization, and blaming Israel for what's happening in Gaza. They should be blaming Hamas, not Israel. Israel did what any country in the world would do when its people are attacked in such a way. It will go after the terrorist organizations that did that, and will try to hunt them down. This is what Israel did. But who exposed the Palestinian people to this is Hamas. And Hamas should be punished twice for what they did to the Israelis and for what they did to the Palestinians. It's not acceptable that Hamas is now being seen once again as a political actor, and let's negotiate with Hamas on ceasefire. Really? Hamas, which had already had a ceasefire on October 6th, chose to start this war, chose to do this terrorist attack, and now you want to negotiate with it to go back to the point of October 6th. It's not acceptable. Hamas should be defeated, and the entire world should cooperate with Israel on defeating Hamas. But again, this takes us to the point that we started with. Unfortunately, when I said that, I just said what I said to you, right now on Egyptian media. At that time, I was leading a think tank in Egypt, and usually they invite me to comment on geopolitical affairs in the region. So they invited me to speak about the war that started in Gaza at that time. It was towards the end of October 2023. And of course, they expected me, to blame Israel, to say, Hamas is the resistance group and we're behind it, and all this narratives that occupied our media at that time and still occupying our media until now. But I said the opposite. I said, no, they are criminals. I saw the videos and I saw this and that. And it seems that it was so shocking, first of all, to the Islamists, and second, to the Egyptian government, who did not want the public to learn about what really happened on October 7th. So they were so offended that I exposed them and I made them appear like liars. Nice. So they decided to punish me. First, the Islamists, unfortunately, some radical groups, the Salafists in particular, went to my mother's house looking for me. They wanted to kill me. And luckily, I was not there at that time. And when I contacted the authorities in Egypt and I said, there are people who want to kill me, they are radical Islamists, please protect me. They said, no, we will not do that because you support Israel. So unfortunately, in a matter of 3 hours, actually overnight, that night, I found that a number of lawyers, some of them very close to the Egyptian leadership, the state leadership in Egypt, filed legal claims against me, accusing me of espionage, of committing high treason, and spying for the Israeli Mossad. Of course, these charges could put me in jail forever, or actually could lead to death sentences. So I had to leave. So within 3 hours, with the help of great friends from the United States and also from Israel that I have known for decades also, they are very close friends. I call them brothers and sisters. They intervened and they helped me get out of the country as fast as possible. And I ended up being in the US before an arrest warrant was issued against me and before I got arrested. So it was quite a moment in my life, but I don't regret it. I feel like I did the right thing. I felt compelled to speak up after I saw what I saw happened on October 7th. And I'm happy I did, because actually it broke the pattern of the narratives that the Arab governments and the Egyptian government in particular wanted to sell at that time. So I'm happy that I was able to disturb this narrative.
Wow. It's incredibly moving. I'm so sorry for what you went through, but I mean, I also am in awe, at the power. That's the whole nature of trying to keep, women, you and I know this was kind of our first activism. That's really that sort of infinite power that you could tap into, and what that voice of truth can do. So I thank you personally, and certainly on behalf of anyone trying to represent those objective truths. And I hope for reason, I hope for, but a real peace, but I hope for that truth to prevail, really, that one that none of us has hold of, and that you can live safely and speak freely wherever you are. I think there's no question that October 7th and what you described before in the universities, it seemed to me that October 7th more than anything was sort of that gunshot off into the marathon. That was sort of the call for all the Islamists across the world to, okay, now we're moving in. Now's the go.
Right.
It was not an isolated invasion, whatever different people have different nouns, but it was a true invasion. I think people don't understand to the degree how deep inside Israel the terrorists got. But that's exactly what happened. So that was a real war, and it's not limited to Israel and Gaza. And as you said several times, and is our greatest hope, is what we saw the night that Iran sent over 300 plus drones, missiles, all sorts of things. That moment that we come together, it's really awesome to hear you say this about the other Arab nations waiting for, because you need America to to not back out on its friends. You need to show you've got a real consistent friend through thick and thin. I want to ask you, there's just a couple of things. I know we're already on, but I'm just going to keep you here for another while longer. But the Abraham Accords, Dalia, tell me really where do you think that there's any weaknesses? What's your hope? And do we have any concern that, like the peace, the formal peace with Egypt, but the hatred that remained among the population, do we have concern that that's going to be the kind of peace that we're looking at? Is it going to be sort of a self-serving, only to become strong to later, come back?
Yeah, so, okay, this is a very good question. The Abraham Accords were so great in themselves, in my opinion. They are like groundbreaking event that nobody was expecting would happen, and people were very excited when it happened at the time. But the problem is that, similar to the peace treaties that happened between Egypt and Israel and Jordan and Israel in the past, it didn't address the critical issue of bringing the general public on board. It felt like it is on the level of government to government transaction, for reasons that does not directly relate to the daily lives of the general public. In Egypt and Jordan case, who are the immediate neighbors of Israel, the main reason behind the peace treaties were security, to ensure certain security transactions, certain security coordination and agreements. So they agree somehow that we will not hurt each other for a while. But it's not about we are going to cooperate with each other. We saw a change in this in the Abraham Accords, also because of its nature. It's signed between Israel and neighbors who are not immediate, they are exist in the region, but they are distant, like the Gulf countries, like Bahrain and UAE, for example, or Morocco that exists in North Africa. So they are not immediate neighbors of Israel. So the transaction was mainly focused on economic cooperation at the basis for it's good. It's not anymore the narrative about, or it's not anymore based on like, let's not hurt each other, let's live like calmly next to each other. But now it's about let's cooperate with each other. But also the fact that these countries that signed the Abraham Accords are actually not the immediate neighbors countries of Israel did not make it strong enough to create the momentum in the regions that we wanted, compared to, for example, the normalization initiatives that we were all expecting with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not a new country. It has been there during the time of the wars, even during the time of the establishment of Israel and the wars that happened afterwards. And so Saudi Arabia has a history, has also this position of, being the leader of Arabs. So if Saudi Arabia normalizes, the leader of Arabs and leader of Muslims. So if it's the land where Islam started. So if Saudi Arabia normalizes with Israel, this is like a green light to all Muslims and Arabs to also that it is also acceptable. Let's go and normalize with Israel, have good relationships with Israel. So if this could have happened, if it was not for October 7, I'm sure it was going to be something really great, and it was going to be the real peace that we wanted to see. It's not the security-based peace that we saw with Egypt and Jordan, and it's not the economic peace that we saw with UAE and Bahrain. But it could have been the beginning of the real peace between Arabs and Muslims and Israel and the Jews. But it didn't happen. We have to push. I think we have to continue pushing, despite the wars that's going on right now, to continue pushing for this to happen, because if Arab and Muslim peace with Israel is achieved, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is only a drop in a sea when you look at the bigger picture, will eventually be achieved.
Yes.
Because this normalization between Arabs and Muslims and Israel will mark the end of Hamas, will mark the end of Iran and all its militia that are basing their legitimacy on fighting against Israel for religious reasons. So it seems to me like this is the way to the solution.
It's exactly right, because ultimately, with, again, You have 15 million Jews, maybe 16, and you 20 plus Arab nations, 1.8 or whatever. We know the numbers of billions of Muslims, and ultimately, the only way forward is as far as I can say. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but from my point of view, Dalia, the only way forward has got to be the Arab or Muslim acceptance of Israel and Jews. That, because other than that, because what you described when we helped out with the tunnels with Egypt, because we understand it doesn't necessarily have to be with hugs and kisses. We understand the nature of keeping peace so that citizens, the people who want to just get on with their lives, can. That's what the understanding is. It's ultimately, to me, it's just that simple thing that seems so far off. And I really want to ask you, as ubiquitous as that hatred is, what realistically could be done? How could we possibly get there to have that sort of acceptance of Israel, at least of Jews? Where do we start? How can we really get there? At least, I feel like it's going to be, you want to talk about a group effort? That's going to be a global group effort, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not easy at all. It will take many years to happen, but let's start it. I mean, what I'm saying that it's difficult is not just to make it like, oh, it's difficult, let's forget about it. No, it's difficult, and let's start from now to do it. I believe small things like, for example, me and you, Ilana, in this podcast right now, is one step forward in this direction. Is the direction of people to people talk, of sharing our ideas. You're a Jewish woman, I'm a Muslim woman, we live in this, or I used to live with you in the same region. Hopefully I'll be back soon. So we belong to the same region, we belong to the same culture, but in normal circumstances, we are not allowed to speak to each other. Now we are breaking this. We are breaking this pattern and talking to each other because we want peace. We want to achieve peace, and we understand we have something in common. More and more initiatives like this one is going eventually to make it normal, not for governments to normalize relations with each other, but for the general public, that it is acceptable. They feel that it is acceptable that I speak with a Jewish person about things that doesn't has to do with the Palestinian issue. Actually, the thing is that you feel like there is some kind of a Palestinization of the Middle East, or a Palestinization of Islam. Like all of a sudden, whenever you think about the Middle East, it's Palestine, whenever actually you go to bookstores, even here in the US now, and you go to the Middle East section, it's all about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. The Middle East is bigger than that. The Middle East, there is a lot bigger, and there are too many other problems to be occupied with in the region and to write books about, to write articles about, other than the Israel-Palestinian conflict, really. I mean, but there are certain people, not only the radical Islamists, but also the corrupt governments in the region. They want to feed into this narrative because it's serving them. They want to feed into the narrative that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a central issue in the region because it's serving them. So let's ignore the governments. Let's look at the people-to-people level, focus on this one-on-one communications, talk with each other. I believe we now even need to talk with each other even more before October. It was important before October 7. Now it's even more important to talk, debate, discuss, even fight verbally with each other, but eventually with the goal to get to the point of not agreement, but accepting each other. I don't have to agree with you, but I should accept you. I should acknowledge that you exist. You have your own ideas. You have your own life. And I have to respect that. This is the only way to replace the narrative of we exist here just to annihilate each other, to eliminate each other from existence. And I will not be good unless I eliminate you from existence, which is not true.
I find that very moving, actually, because it's something that I've said myself, which is, as long as you stay in the conversation, as long as you stay in the conversation, then eventually you're going to get to a place, at least carb. We have milk and meat, and then you have a place that at least is not an active wound. So staying in the conversation, I think, is true across for every relationship. And the idea that honestly, it's a real small world these days. It's a real small world. There is no over there, and there's somebody else's problem. And I'll ask you one last question, even though I've got another like 20. But I really want to hear, because again, talking about speaking to my heart, was the idea of what a poor job Israel is doing in the media war.
Very bad. Yeah.
It's so bad. Okay, so let's just say, I also want to make very clear that the Islamism that chased you out of your own country, totalitarian authoritarianism, the very nature of it is the lack of the ability to speak freely. That is the fundamental root of freedom. Okay, and people call it out with Russia, and they call it out with North Korea, and they call it out with China, but nobody calls it out with the Islamists. And that's exactly what we're seeing. With the lack of freedom of women, all of these things come under that first ability to say, it's got to be my narrative. That you talked about something that you saw from CCTV, yeah? And now you're thousands of miles away. Dalia, you're put in charge of Israel's media to the world. What do you do? Who do you speak to, and how? How do you get it out of there?
Yeah, Ilana, of course, it's not a secret that unfortunately the Israeli media is not acting as good as they should be. At all. Actually, it's when you look, for example, at you have channels like Al Jazeera and what they're doing and how much funding is poured in there to promote the message of the bad guys, while actually on the other side there is no bilateral media entity or media outlet that can promote our message, promote the message of peace, or even the message of the Israelis, the Israeli people. It doesn't exist. And yes, some initiatives, some TV stations, some even social media initiatives like YouTube channels, podcasts, and even some people on X and other LinkedIn and other platforms are trying to make change. And even TikTok, which is occupied by the Islamists, as you know, and the communists China style. Although these people exist who are trying to change that, they are also working individually. They are not working together in a cooperative way, the same way the bad guys are doing. Actually, when you look at how the Islamists are leading this, it's really interesting. So Qatar brings up some piece of news. They take it and they cut the videos and they put it on social media in a certain way. A totally different group from Al Jazeera. They take it and they promote it in a different way. And then a third source, which is maybe a think tank in some Western capitals that's affiliated to them, takes this piece of news or video or something and makes something out of it. So the lie, which started as a lie, ends up being the fact. And you end up being in a situation that you have to defend yourself against this lie, which is originally a lie. But no one can see this anymore. So it's important. It's important. If we are talking about potential Arab-Israeli cooperation in the coming period, this is where Arabs and Israelis can cooperate without really forcing Arabs to have boots on the ground in Gaza or anything. They can have boots on the ground in the social media, in the traditional media outlets. They can work together on that. Some Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who share common values and common goals with Israel, have already powerful media outlets and TV stations. They can use these TV stations to counter the narrative that Qatar's Al Jazeera and others are promoting. So this is, I think, could be the first step of cooperation between Arabs and Israel in this war against the Iran-sponsored militia and their allies. So, but for this to happen, again, there has to be an initiative, and this initiative should come from the US, not from Israel. So these Arab countries will be willing to cooperate without worrying much about how their general public will respond to that and how the mainstream in their countries will respond to that. It's very complicated, as you can see, but small steps on the way can lead to change, hopefully, but let's think more collectively, from a collective perspective, not just individual initiatives. It's important. It's time right now to find a way to coordinate all these individual media efforts together to create a momentum that can counter the momentum created by the Islamists.
Spot on. That's exactly also it doesn't take a brain surgeon. We are stronger when we work together in tandem, and I really encourage people to reach out. I welcome people to reach out to me, to you, Dalia. Tell people where they can find you. This is it. Like, there's no, you don't get to be a special snowflake. We're fighting for civilization, so let's really make it happen, because this is real time. This is real time. So God willing, honestly, Dalia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Got to come on again, because you really have an amazing amount of clarity, and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Ilana. It was a great pleasure being with you, and I really enjoyed our conversation very much.
Me too. So, Dalia, where do people find you? Where do they see your work?
I go by Dalia Ziada, Dalia Ziada, Ziada. On most of the time I live on Twitter, actually. So most of the time I'm on X or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Dalia, I wish you all the luck in the world. I wish you home in peace soon, and that your ideas and your perspective should be amplified.
Thank you so much, Ilana, and I wish the same for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm pausing that.